Louis James, Professor Emeritus in Victorian and Modern Literature at the University of Kent. He served on various editorial boards and advisory committees, including the Victorian Periodicals Review, the Journal of Commonwealth Literature, Wasafiri, and the British Library Anglo-American Computerized Bibliography of Victorian Periodicals. Louis James, your parents were missionaries in Africa. Tell me, what was your early childhood like?
I was the firstborn child of a Dutch father and English mother, stationed in Dahomey, deep in the French West African interior. As it was an unhealthy place to bring up a child, my mother returned to England for my birth in 1933, and then left me with a foster parent who went back to Africa. 2 years later, my mother returned for the birth of my brother, Gordon, and then we both returned to live with our parents, who are now working on a mission station in Chipembe, in what was then northern Rhodesia. We lived in a farm bungalow across a small river below the Methodist mission station. There were no shops. All our food came from our farm and game stocked by my father. Wildlife was all around us. I have a vivid memory, when paddling in the river, of being violently snatched up by my mother as a crocodile emerged from the water. Besides working in the mission school, my mother taught us children using correspondence courses from England. She mended our clothes and even made our soap using hippo fat and caustic soda. Father worked on both the mission station and the farm, and he ran its workshop, converting a Chevrolet truck into an all-terrain vehicle. My father taught me some basic workshop skills, but he was very reserved as a father in an initial of his private life. Then, one night, our family were invited to a village celebration and watched the African men dancing to the beating of the drums lit by a great bonfire. Suddenly my father rose and joined them. Stepping high in time to the tribal rhythms, his face gleaming in a vision of delight in the firelight. Many years later, when asked to write an essay on my interest in Africa, I entitled it Dancing Towards My Father. Then the outbreak of war in Europe in 1939 threw everything into turmoil. As my father waited for an army call-up, and then came, we moved south. Father supervised a church in Windhoek, what was then Namibia, and later worked among an impoverished mixed-race community in the Stock River side of Cape Town. Mother moved with us children to the South African Methodist Mission at Hilltown, where she taught and ran the girls' boarding school. In February 1940, while on a touring holiday to the Cape Province, my parents visited Kingswood College in Grahamstown and then left me behind at the school at the border when they went on their holiday.
So, Louis, what was your schooling in South Africa like?
Well, Kingswood was the main Methodist school and had a good academic record. Like all South African institutions at that time, it was segregated into black and white and ruled by apartheid rules. It was not an easy place for a 7-year-old white boy who had been brought up in an isolated mission station among black Africans. New boys were subject to brutal initiation rites, and those of us who did not fit in were victimized. Beatings by masters, prefects, and older bullies were just part of school life. One day I was found hiding in a cupboard by an African servant, Nancy. She picked me up and hugged me. "Don't cry," she comforted. "They're only children." But among my school reports, I still have a copy of the Weekly Star. This was a handwritten by me as a crude approximation of a newspaper. 4 columns on cannibalized school exercise books. It's evidence of the imaginary worlds that I created for myself. Later, while on holiday with my mother at Shieldtown, I was taken under the wing of a coloured carpentry teacher who had once been a boxing champion. Pushing back the benches of his workshop, he brought out pairs of gloves and coached me in the arts of boxing. Back at school, I joined the boxing club, and at the annual tournament with a rival school, was matched against one of their best fighters. Thanks to my African tutor, and against all expectations, I won. Suddenly found myself something of a school hero, but at the end of that school year, I was to leave. For all its pains, my childhood left me with the experience of having to find my own way, and was drawn to sympathize with the lives of colonized peoples.
When did you and your family come back to England, and what led to you entering Oxford?
In 1945, my mother and we children, 4 of us, returned to England to live with our maternal grandmother in Shrewsbury. I was enrolled at the boarder at Kingswood School in Bath. School life here was to be very different from that in Grahamstown. The first night in the dormitory, being set on by a bully, I punched him over. Seen by the prefect, I was immediately punished and warned that no such behaviour would be tolerated. Again, I found myself an impotent outsider, but I discovered books. I plunged into reading Flaubert, Stendhal, Dostoevsky. I won a school prize for essay on Tolstoy's View of History. An older boy, Anthony Thwaite, later become a well-known writer, befriended me and introduced me to James Joyce's Portrait of an Artist as a young man. Reading it, I remember, left me in a dream world. In 1951, I won an open scholarship to study at Jesus College, Oxford. And after a gap year at an international youth camp in Tunisia, I began studies for an honours degree in English literature. It was a great time to be at Oxford. Tuition took up only 2 hours a week, and with attendance at lectures are voluntary, we had plenty of freedom to explore for ourselves. Popular lecturers included J.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Neville Coghill, Helen God, and Lord David Cecil. I had to write the day's lecture over breakfast using pieces of toast to mark his quotations. In 1956, I became joint editor of the Jesus College magazine, The Dragon. For it, we interviewed W.H. Auden and asked how he felt about being elected Oxford Professor of Poetry. "Well, I feel it's silly to have to be a professor who can't profess," he answered. "I think the professor might be just a bit more available." I acted with the school drama company, the Catherines, and wrote a play myself, The Right Room, performed by an amateur group and then taken up to London's East End. Part of my first play, Storm Over Galilee, was then broadcast on the BBC 3.
And Louis, what did you do when you graduated from Oxford?
The decisive moment in my academic career came in 1957. I followed my undergraduate years by reading for an Oxford PhD, an Oxford DPhil. I was writing a thesis on Wordsworth under John Jones. I read a letter in the Times Literary Supplement complaining that the British Library had not catalogued the bequest of a music hall artiste, Barry Ono. A North Library curator explained that it contained only ephemeral penny issue fiction and was unlikely to be catalogued while the library was under heavy pressure elsewhere. He offered to bring it up from the vaults for me to look through my own interest. I read and was fascinated, and switched the subject of my thesis to Victorian popular fiction. Finding dormitory accommodation in Oxford House, a social mission in East London, I cycled to work at the British Library for the day and helped run the club activities in the evenings. I developed my skill as an amateur conjurer, entertaining at a Rotary Club party for the elderly, floating a woman into space, the Bethnal Green Community pantomime, and I briefly became a member of the Magic Circle. In 1958, I joined the Extramural Studies Department at the University of Hull as staff tutor, working south of the Humber River, organising and teaching classes in rural Lincolnshire. Richard Hogarth, who just published the use of literacy, was a colleague. We were later joined by the novelist Malcolm Bradbury. Philip Larkin was the university librarian and gave us his poems to teach. He took a friendly interest in my research and came to the party for my departure, announcing, "Now James is leaving, the library can get some of its books back." In 1961, I gained a DPhil for a thesis that Oxford University Press published as Fiction for the Working Man, 1830-50. That was in 1963. 8 years later, this book became Penguin paperback, and in 1976, Alan Lane published a companion volume, Print of the People, 1890 to 1851. Then in 1961, I married Jill Hennings, who moved from Sussex to live with me in a small rented farm cottage in the Lincolnshire countryside. There were no luxuries. The one water tap was in an adjoining outhouse. We shared one bath a week in front of the kitchen fire, using a tin bath brought in from the kitchen's hot wall. The lavatory bucket was emptied once a week by the council clerk. When Nicola, our first child, arrived, Jill faced a lonely life. I spent much of the day preparing to teach small groups of Lodgy farm labourers who had to be tempted out of after a hard day's work to adult classes in cold, vacated village schoolrooms. I'd written about popular fiction. Now I could study the response of unsophisticated readers at first hand. And like penny serial authors, I had to learn how to keep my audience's attention if I was to earn my keep.
Louis, I've always wondered how you went from Oxford and Victorian popular culture to the Caribbean and its literature, and how you experienced these seemingly different projects. Was there any connection between them?
Well, in 1963, I was appointed lecturer in English at the University of the West Indies at Mona, Jamaica. With my wife and young daughter, I set sail from Tilbury on the 2 weeks voyage on a 5-banana boat, and for the next 3 years rented a house on the Kingston campus, sited high above the city. 2 more daughters, Shelley and Hilary, arrived. We entered the lively campus social life, sometimes dancing to reggae music into the early morning and joining the local dramatic activities. I took the part of the fool in the open-air production of King Lear, with a racially mixed cast, and heard Lear rage against the storm under the still radiance of the Jamaican stars. At a touring production of Dickens readings by Eminem Williams in the main Kingston Theatre, I watched a sea of Jamaican faces mocked with laughter at the exploits of Mr. Pickwick and Sam Weller. We also enjoyed new Jamaican drama. Jill, my wife, took part in a broadcast play by the young playwright Barry Record. Cramming the family into our little mini traveller, we explored beyond the tourist trails, from the sands of the Grill to the historic site of Morant Bay Rebellion. We followed the hairpin bends of narrow roads through villages, clinging to the steep slopes to the interior Blue Mountains. I visited Trinidad as the guest of Derek Walcott, who took me to watch one of his plays take shape out of improvised scenes to a sort of his multi-talented company, the Trinidad Theatre Workshop. Jamaica as a nation was in a confident mood, having achieved independence within the Commonwealth the previous year. As the university courses were still validated by the University of London, our teaching was confined strictly to text in the English literary canon. But I quickly found myself involved in contemporary Caribbean writing. The Trinidadian poet Wayne Brown was one of my students and discussed the poems he was later published in On the Coast, 1972. Barbadian poet Edward Cameau Vathwaite, who taught in the history department, invited me to his home to hear and read draft of his landmark work, Rites of Passage, published in 1962. Jamaican critic and poet Mervyn Morris taught nearby, and we became friends. Through contact with these and other writers, my academic life became divided between conventional English and the emerging wave of Caribbean writing in English. I edited and introduced the first collection of essays on this new literature to be published, Islands in Between, at Oxford University Press, 1968. In 1965, I was flown back to England to be interviewed for a lectureship at the newly instituted University of Canterbury. When the University of Kent was founded, one of its aims had been the pioneer study of emergent literatures in English, and I was hired to develop courses in Caribbean literature. I was a teacher at Kent with some breaks over 40 years, during which time I advanced as a senior lecturer to become a professor in Victorian and modern literature. Our family grew with the birth of a son, Adrian, known as Jim, and I designed courses on contemporary Caribbean literature in English that could never have been taught in Jamaica. Carol Phillips and Samuel Selwyn, well-known writers, were among those I invited to speak on their work. Campbell Brathwaite, who had come to England to read for a PhD in history at the University of Sussex, delivered the annual University T.S. Eliot Lectures. Mervyn Morris stayed at Kent for a year and became a visiting lecturer. We awarded the University D.Litt degrees to the Trinidad historian C.L.R. James and to the Guyanese writer Wilson Harris. I had written the first published monograph on the Dominican novelist Jean Rhys in 1978. To award her a D.Litt, a group of us travelled down to a cottage in Cheverton-Fitzpaine in Devon. There, fully robed, smiling with a glass of champagne in her hand, she listened to the recording of a degree ceremony in Canterbury Cathedral. The only problem came when we asked for the return of the robes when we left. She thought they went with the degree and she was able to keep them. My Caribbean friendships continued to expand. The poet and critic Michael Gilkes invited me to Barbados. Later, in 1976, I became external examiner for the University of Guyana. Flying to Georgetown, South America, I found they were still waiting for confirmation of results from the University of London, leaving me free to explore the interior. A local travel agency arranged a tour in the form of sealed letters, which, successively opened, revealed the next day's means of transport and destination. At one stage, a river steamer took me to the mining town of Bartica, in just a grid of narrow lanes between shops, saloons, and small offices. These served a transient population of prospectors who returned from mines deep in the Guyanese jungles, sold their gold and diamonds to agents of the town, and then, after spending their earnings in Bartica saloons and brothels, they stocked up with supplies and returned back into the interior. That night, sitting in a noisy saloon, I met a well-dressed young Guyanese man. Then, as I taught English literature, he asked if I knew a writer called Henry James. He was a Guyanese forest inspector who, faced with a long trek into the interior, had visited the British Council Library in Georgetown, and he borrowed the thickest volume he could see, Henry James's Wings of the Dove. For the next tour, he chose The Golden Bowl. Now he's working his way through Henry James's complete works. It was a strange experience, sitting in a saloon bar on a tropical night under the flickering Indian lights, speaking against pulse and Kaiser dance music, and the loud chatter of heavily made-up women and their clients, discussing the novels of Henry James. The high point in every sense of my journey into the interior was a flight by a Guyanese Air Force plane, the heights of a central plateau, then on the edge of the Kayatur waterfall. As I watched the mighty Potara River plunge over 700 feet in an unbroken drop to the forest below, I understood the fascination of this lost world from writers from Conan Doyle to Elijah Carpentier and Wilson Harris. Later, back in England, Captain Brathwaite, together with the Jamaican novelist and critic Andrew Salkey and the Trinidadian poet Jean Rhys, had brought together writers and artists of the era to form the Caribbean artist movement. I became involved in the organisation and hosted its two major conferences at the University of Kent, 1977 and 1978. I was also in contact with post-colonial studies at the University of Sussex, Exeter, and I became a founding member of ACTCAL, the Association of Teachers in Caribbean African Language. I also liaised with European research and Commonwealth literatures. I made visits to Professor Henry Marjolanek and Benedict Ledon in Liège, Belgium, and to Jean Rhys in Dijon, France. Between 1976 and 1982, I gave lectures there and 8 other European universities, besides teaching for a term at Montpellier University. Back in England, I was involved in the launch by Shashina Nasser of the important journal of Third World Writing in English, Wasafiri, which still flourishes today.
And how did your interests combine Caribbean with Victorian popular literature?
My work in Victorian popular fiction had continued as new material had come to light. Little ephemeral 19th century fiction had been preserved in scholarly libraries. My research led me to private collectors, several of whom had generously opened their collections to me. The most important of these was the actor, Frank Bettingill. He made me his literary executor, and on his death, I was able to steer his massive collection of playbills, copies, and manuscripts to the Temple Library at the University of Kent. At the time, academic critics often refused to give Dickens the status of a major author, seeing him as a lightweight entertainer. My research had shed light on the ways contemporary drama and the visual arts had helped to shape his fiction. With the help of the Kent University printing unit, I produced material in the Petticoat Archive and elsewhere to illustrate Dickens's roots in popular culture. And I sold this in the university bookshop as a basic text for students to use in an honours degree course, Dickens and His World, supplemented by guest lectures on such topics as popular caricature. The course proved a long-running success. It led the Open University to request an illustrated lecture to be used in their own novel course, titled Words, Pictures and a Novel. For this, Alexandra Palace Television Studios enlarged illustrations from Dickens' novels right up to life size and cut them out in seeding planes, which were stood up to create 3-dimensional stage sets into which I could walk and discuss Dickens' narrative. This program was broadcast on the BBC in 1981 and again in 1985.
Louis, what led you to your interest in melodrama?
The popularity of melodrama in Victorian culture was drawing a wide range of interests. Wiley Cypher identified melodrama as the key modality in the 19th century, a way of thinking which resolved human action into a dialectic between two absolute forces of conflict towards a single resolution. It's a perspective that had shaped both Darwin's theory of evolution and Marxist view of this class struggle. Eric Bentley had related melodrama to the evocation of intense emotion, a depth of feeling that violates the human subconscious. Melodrama, declared, is a naturalism of the dream life. In our course at Kent, we discussed these and other theories, but our central aim was to explore the actual experience of watching melodrama. We constructed scenes as they might have been originally staged, using contemporary acting handbooks such as Henry Siddon's Practical Illustrations of Rhetorical Gestures, 1822, and Diane Lucifer's The Art of Acting, 1882. With the help of music specialist Dr. Jan Shepherd, we created the original musical scores for popular melodramas such as Douglas Jerrold's Black-Eyed Susan. We examined the effect of audience reaction by producing two contrasting melodramas, complete with their original music, and performing them in four different audiences. One before a university audience in Canterbury, another in the Hoxton Hall in London's East End before working class spectators. We then discussed the differences in performance and audience reaction. This experiment attracted the interest of Raphael Samuel and other socialist historians, several of whom attended the London performance, and asked me to write it up in an article later published in the journal Theatre Workshop. In 1977, David Bradbury joined me to organise an international conference on popular drama at the University of Kent, and with Vernon Sherritt, I co-edited the proceedings as Performance and Politics in Popular Drama, published by Cambridge University Press in 1980.
Louis, I know that you taught in a variety of American universities, but also in some African ones. How did that come about?
In 1969, I took a yearly absence to teach at the University of South Carolina in the USA. We found this very different from my Jamaican experience. The students and staff at the university were exclusively white, as were the congregation of Episcopalian church we attended, and the city was strictly divided along racial lines. My wife Jill defied social conventions by helping in the exclusively black YWCA and found herself warmly welcomed. I was conscripted to play Santa Claus at the club Christmas party. When we left Columbia, they gave us an enthusiastic send-off singing, "We love you, Mrs. James." I was offered a university professorship, but did not want to raise my family in what was then a segregated society. Nevertheless, America has become a popular destination for our family. The next year, Michael Wolff invited me to do research and to teach the summer school in Bloomington, Indiana, where the family greatly enjoyed camping excursions into the neighboring state parks. In 1971, I taught and delivered the Miller Foundation Lecture at the University of Illinois. From 1973 to 1974, I took the family on a year's exchange lectureship at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, Africa. This proved a very different experience to that of Jamaica. Our students in Africa maintained a strict separation between English and Yoruba cultures, and when we were invited to a tribal ceremony, as white spectators, we were being watched at a distance. In travelling on bicycle, I was stopped by a policeman and admonished, "You should be in a car. White people don't ride bicycles." We were aliens and foreigners. Driving between Ibadan and Lagos, I was waved down by another officer, who demanded and emptied my wallet for all its money. When I protested that he was a policeman and on duty, he invited me to come to the police station, an offer I hastily refused. The moment I experienced the impotence felt by immigrants in Britain. The ancestral gods in Nigeria could be a filthy presence. A Yoruba play on the campus opened with the sacrifice of a live cockerel to appease the spirits. Travelling through a village in the country, we came across an Egungun ceremony celebrating the return of the dead. The spirits of the ancestors, costumed in smoking raffia, and emerged from the hut, their eyes holes of darkness in masks patterned with cowrie shells, haunt me to this day. On a university expedition, we climbed the sacred mountain Idandre, accessible only through a narrow dead defile, and were awed by the great granite peak towering into the sky. We travelled to Benin to watch village craftsmen cast bronze statues by the ancient lost wax process. Loading up our little Volkswagen variant with camping equipment, we crossed the Niger and travelled north, where we were paced by camels on the sand roads and saw the city of Kano on the edge of the vast Sahara Desert. Our year in Africa brought an unforgettable experience in other ways of seeing and feeling, as it survived in the deracinated cultures of the Caribbean. Then the years 1978 to 80 were spent with my family in Boulder, Colorado, mainly teaching English introductory courses. What my students lacked in background knowledge, literature and history, they made up for with enthusiasm and personal response. One student told me how reading Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice had affected his own personal life. Others related characters in literature to people they had known. I changed my teaching to encourage student reactions. When I stayed a second year to teach largely adult group science fiction at the University of Denver, I divided my time between lectures and small discussion groups devoted to group student responses to their readings. The family greatly enjoyed outdoor camping in Colorado. A memorable 2 years ended with us packing up our belongings into an ancient Chevrolet estate car and driving east, right across the United States. We visited the national parks, the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, Bryce Canyon, and ended by canoeing across the eastern lakes up to the Canadian border. My travels abroad were to continue later, the experiences of Eastern cultures. From 1986 to 1987, I was a visiting professor at the University of Singapore. This was followed by lecturing at the universities of Australia in Perth, Adelaide, and Sydney. At the British Council, I toured the Malaysian University of Surabaya and Bandung. I married to Jill, we broken up. And in 1994, I married Louise McConnell. My son Jim, who was working in Beijing, organized for us to tour the Chinese interior. And in 2010, with Louise, I celebrated my 64th birthday with a party set out on the Great Wall of China. My work on Victorian popular literature was becoming focused on the work and life of G.W.N. Reynolds. My research had come full circle. When I began my research on Victorian popular literature in 1957, Reynolds' central importance had recently been brought to notice in the publication based on Margaret Dowdall's own Oxford PhD thesis, Popular Fiction 100 Years Ago. Throughout my academic life, Reynolds' studies had brought me rewarding friendships with fellow researchers, Dick Collins and William in England, Stephen Knight in Australia, and Anne Humphreys in New York. In 2008, Anne Humphreys joined me to edit the academic monographs devoted to Reynolds. By then, Reynolds had attracted a notable body of younger scholars, including Jennifer Connery, Mary L. Shannon, Rebecca Nesbitt, and Stephen Bastio. The first study conference explicitly devoted to Reynolds studies was held in London in the year 2000, and after another meeting of the G.W.N. Reynolds Society was founded in 2019.
Louis James, how do you now look back on your life?
Oh, it's with a huge gratitude for the chances brought by my education and my work, and for the kindnesses I've received throughout my working life. Acts of generosity made by academic study a succession of opening windows, the kindness of private collectors who shared their discoveries, the trendiness of writers who helped me gain access to their own creative worlds. Now I'm retired, it gives me special pleasure to have contact with the younger critics who are exploring still further afield.
Louis James, Professor Emeritus in Victorian and Modern Literature at the University of Kent. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.